My name is Olivia Mercer, and 8 months ago, my husband laughed in front of his friends and asked whether my salary even counted as income anymore, or if it was just a hobby with taxes attached. Last week, I watched that same man sit across from me at our kitchen table asking whether I could cover the mortgage because his accounts were frozen. His business partners were suing him, and the company he spent years worshiping had collapsed in less than 48 hours. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why some people mistake money for superiority until life forces them to discover the difference between wealth and stability. And if you enjoy stories about arrogance, betrayal, and the moment underestimated women stop apologizing for surviving differently, subscribe and let me know what you would have done in my place. When I met my husband, Daniel, he was charismatic in the way ambitious men often are during the years before success becomes arrogance. He worked in corporate investment consulting, dressed like someone permanently walking into important meetings, and carried himself with the confidence of a man convinced his future would eventually justify every flaw in his personality. At the time, I found that confidence attractive because I grew up around instability. My father lost jobs constantly. My mother stretched grocery money like survival depended on creativity, and every major expense in our house arrived with panic attached to it. Daniel felt safe, predictable, driven. Back then, he respected my work. I taught elementary school in a lower-income district on the east side of the city, and during our early years together, Daniel used to tell people he admired how patient and grounded I was. He said my job mattered because shaping children mattered. Looking back now, I realize respect often disappears from relationships the moment one person's income starts dramatically outperforming the others. At first, Daniel earned maybe 30% more than me. Then came promotions, bonuses, investment opportunities, new clients. By our 6th year of marriage, he was making more in quarterly bonuses than I earned in an entire year teaching. That was when the language changed. Not suddenly, gradually. My salary stopped being discussed like a contribution and started being framed like symbolic participation. Whenever financial conversations happened, Daniel used phrases that sounded harmless individually, but slowly reshaped the power dynamic inside the marriage. He would joke that my paycheck covered groceries, while his covered real life. During arguments, he occasionally reminded me the house technically existed because of his career trajectory. If I questioned expensive purchases, he would smile and say things like, "Don't worry, this isn't coming out of teacher money." People underestimate how psychologically corrosive financial disrespect becomes over time because humiliation hidden inside humor still functions like humiliation. The worst part was that Daniel genuinely believed he was generous. He paid most major bills willingly. He upgraded our lifestyle constantly. Bigger house, luxury vacations, country club memberships, expensive restaurants where conversations revolved around investments and networking opportunities I barely understood. From the outside, our marriage looked successful because financially it was. But wealth changes some people emotionally in disturbing ways. Daniel slowly stopped viewing money as a shared resource and started viewing it as proof of hierarchy. Meanwhile, I kept teaching. Not because I lacked ambition, because I genuinely loved it. My students came from difficult homes most years. Kids raising younger siblings while parents worked overnight shifts. Children translating bills for immigrant families before learning multiplication properly. Teaching mattered to me because, unlike Daniel's corporate world, I could physically see the impact of my work every day. But over time, Daniel began treating my career like an emotionally cute decision instead of a profession deserving equal respect. The first moment that truly humiliated me happened at one of his office parties. One of Daniel's coworkers asked whether I ever considered leaving teaching since Daniel already earned enough for both of us comfortably. Before I could answer, Daniel laughed and said Olivia works for fulfillment, not finances. It keeps her busy while the adults pay the mortgage. Everybody laughed, including him. I smiled because women learn early how to survive public humiliation without visibly reacting, but something inside me changed permanently that night. Not dramatically, quietly, I started noticing how often Daniel minimized me, socially once his success became tied to his identity. Over the next few years, the comments became sharper. When I bought gifts for family members, Daniel sometimes joked about how adorable it was that teachers still cared about sale prices. If I questioned unnecessary spending, he would remind me I did not understand wealth building mentally because I came from scarcity thinking. During one argument about his constant business travel, he actually told me I should appreciate the lifestyle his sacrifices funded instead of complaining about loneliness. Sacrifices. That word irritated me immediately because Daniel talked about making money like he was fighting a war while everyone else simply benefited from his suffering. But the truth was uglier than that. He loved status. He loved being the highest earner in every room. He loved watching people react to expensive watches, private golf memberships, and investment success stories. Eventually, he stopped seeing money as security and started seeing it as identity. The irony was that, despite earning dramatically more than me, Daniel lived financially fragile in ways he never recognized. Wealthy-looking and financially stable are not always the same thing. Daniel leveraged everything aggressively because high-income corporate culture rewards visible success almost addictively. Bigger investments, riskier deals, luxury property partnerships with colleagues, image-based spending designed to maintain social positioning around other wealthy men, performing success for each other constantly. Meanwhile, my small salary quietly built something his never did. Stability. I kept separate savings accounts because growing up poor permanently changes how your nervous system responds to uncertainty. I maxed retirement contributions consistently, avoided debt emotionally whenever possible, maintained emergency savings. Daniel mocked that mindset constantly, calling it fear-based financial thinking. He said money should move aggressively, or it dies slowly. Then came the dinner 8 months ago. Daniel invited several colleagues and clients to our house after closing a massive investment acquisition deal, and the entire evening revolved around money in the exhausting way wealthy corporate conversations often do. Market predictions, real estate flips, venture opportunities, tax shelters disguised as networking discussions. I spent most of the night refilling drinks and pretending not to notice how often the wives became decorative background noise during business conversations. At some point, one of Daniel's clients asked whether teaching salaries had improved at all recently because he heard educators were struggling badly with inflation. Before I could answer, Daniel laughed loudly and said Olivia's salary isn't really built for surviving inflation. Honestly, I'm not sure it qualifies as income anymore. It's basically a hobby with direct deposit. The entire table laughed. Again. But this time something different happened. Instead of shrinking quietly like I usually did, I looked directly at him and asked whether he genuinely believed financial value determines personal value. The room went awkwardly silent. Daniel smiled the way arrogant people do when they think someone beneath them is becoming emotional publicly. Then he said no, of course not, but let's be honest. Nobody dreams of becoming a teacher for the money. I answered calmly. And nobody dreams of becoming the kind of husband who humiliates his wife for entertainment, either. That ended the conversation immediately. But the damage stayed. For the first time in our marriage, I started emotionally separating myself from Daniel instead of trying harder to earn respect inside dynamics designed to keep me smaller. And looking back now, that emotional shift probably saved my life financially before everything collapsed. After that dinner, something inside me stopped chasing approval from Daniel completely. That was the real turning point in the marriage, not the company collapse later. People think relationships end during dramatic betrayals, lawsuits, or affairs, but most actually die quietly the moment one person stops emotionally volunteering for humiliation. I still lived in the same house, still attended events beside him, still listened to conversations about investment strategies and market positioning, but internally I started pulling away piece by piece. Daniel noticed the shift too. At first, he treated it like temporary sensitivity. He bought flowers after the dinner incident, apologized halfway, and claimed everyone understood he was joking. That word again. Joking. People who consistently disrespect others through humor always hide behind intent instead of impact because intent protects their self-image. But by then, I was paying attention differently. Once respect disappears from your perception of someone, patterns become impossible to unsee. I started noticing how financially reckless Daniel actually was beneath the polished image. He earned enormous amounts of money, yes, but almost all of it moved immediately. Investment properties leveraged through debt. Risk-heavy private equity deals with colleagues. Constant reinvestment into speculative ventures. Expensive social obligations disguised as networking. Even his friendships revolved around maintaining status through visible spending. Men like Daniel do not simply enjoy wealth. They perform it for each other constantly. One night, about 3 months after the dinner party, I accidentally overheard him arguing privately in his office with one of his business partners over speakerphone. At first, I tried ignoring it because corporate finance conversations usually sounded like another language to me. But then I heard something that stopped me completely. Liquidity problems. The phrase repeated several times. Then margin exposure. Then delayed investor payouts. I stood frozen outside the office door listening while Daniel's voice grew sharper and more defensive than I had ever heard before. Eventually, he noticed me standing there and immediately ended the call. When I asked what was happening, he brushed it off casually, claiming market fluctuations temporarily stressed one of their investment structures. Then he smiled confidently and told me this is why people with small salaries should never panic over big money conversations they do not understand fully. That sentence stayed in my head for weeks afterward. Not because it offended me anymore, because it sounded rehearsed. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel sounded less like a powerful man and more like someone performing certainty aggressively enough to silence his own fear. Over the next few months, the cracks widened slowly. Daniel became increasingly irritable at home. He started checking market reports constantly, even during dinner. Some nights he barely slept. Other nights, he drank too much while ranting about incompetent partners and weak investors, panicking unnecessarily. Yet publicly, he became even more performative than before. More luxury spending, more visible confidence, more social media posts about success and discipline. Looking back now, I realize people most obsessed with appearing financially untouchable are often closest to collapse privately. Meanwhile, I quietly protected myself. I increased contributions to my personal savings account, updated beneficiaries on retirement plans, met privately with a financial advisor from my teachers' union, after realizing I genuinely did not understand how much legal exposure marriage created around Daniel's increasingly unstable business risks. That meeting changed everything. The advisor reviewed basic financial structures connected to our household and immediately looked concerned about how aggressively leveraged several shared assets were. Apparently, Daniel used our home equity as collateral in multiple investment arrangements I barely understood because technically everything looked profitable on paper during growth years. But if liquidity problems expanded, those same structures could become dangerous quickly. When I confronted Daniel later that evening, he laughed. Actually laughed. He told me I was spiraling emotionally because one conservative financial advisor from a teachers' union could not comprehend high-level investment strategy. Then he said something I will probably remember forever. He told me risk is why some people stay middle class forever while others build real wealth. At the time, I almost believed him again because confidence is persuasive when repeated long enough. But deep down, something already shifted permanently inside me. Daniel no longer sounded intelligent. He sounded addicted. Addicted to image, status, expansion, winning. Men like him eventually stopped distinguishing between calculated risk and emotional ego. Then came the collapse. It happened unbelievably fast. One Thursday morning, I arrived at school during standardized testing week and noticed my phone vibrating nonstop inside my purse. At first, I ignored it because teachers do not get the luxury of pausing classrooms for personal drama. But during lunch break, I finally checked the messages. Daniel, 23 missed calls, 4 voicemails, several texts saying call me immediately. My stomach dropped instantly because people do not contact someone that aggressively unless something catastrophic happens. I stepped outside behind the school building and called him back. The moment he answered, I barely recognized his voice. He sounded panicked in a way I had never heard before. One of the investment firms tied to Daniel's company was under federal investigation. Several accounts connected to investor funds were frozen. Partners were blaming each other publicly. Clients were pulling millions. And because so many of their investment structures were interconnected through debt leverage, the entire company started collapsing almost immediately once confidence disappeared. By evening, financial news outlets were already covering the story nationally. One executive resigned publicly. Another reportedly hired criminal defense attorneys. Social media filled with speculation about fraud investigations and missing investor money. Then came the detail that changed everything personally. Most of Daniel's accessible accounts were frozen temporarily during the investigation, including the accounts covering our mortgage payments. That night, Daniel came home looking physically destroyed. Not humbled yet, just shocked. Like a man who genuinely believed wealth itself made him untouchable, until reality interrupted him publicly. He spent hours pacing through the kitchen ranting about incompetent partners, market panic, and temporary regulatory overreach, while trying desperately to convince himself this would stabilize quickly. Then around midnight, after several drinks and 2 phone calls with lawyers, he finally sat across from me quietly at the kitchen table and asked whether I could cover the mortgage temporarily. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I misheard him. This man spent years treating my salary like decorative pocket money. Now he needed it to keep the house. The irony hung between us so heavily, it almost felt physical. He looked embarrassed even asking, but underneath the embarrassment sat something else too. Expectation. Because deep down, Daniel still believed my role was emotional backup support whenever his larger ambitions became unstable. Then he said the sentence that changed everything emotionally. He told me this is exactly why marriages need both people contributing something dependable. Something dependable. Suddenly, my small salary mattered. My stability mattered. My caution mattered. Everything he mocked for years became valuable the moment his performance of invincibility collapsed. And honestly, that was the exact moment I stopped feeling sorry for him. The morning after Daniel asked me to cover the mortgage, I sat alone in my classroom before students arrived staring at worksheets I could barely focus on because something inside me had shifted permanently overnight. For years, Daniel treated my salary like a symbolic contribution inside our marriage. Now, the entire structure holding our life together suddenly depended on the exact financial stability he spent years mocking. The irony was brutal, but what affected me more deeply was realizing how quickly his attitude changed once he needed something from me financially instead of simply outperforming me socially. Over the next few days, the situation worsened publicly. Federal investigators expanded the inquiry into Daniel's company after evidence surfaced suggesting several executives knowingly concealed massive exposure risks from investors. News stations camped outside the corporate headquarters constantly. Lawsuits started appearing almost immediately. Clients demanded withdrawals. The company could no longer honor cleanly because too much money existed inside interconnected speculative structures built on confidence instead of actual liquidity. And confidence was gone. Daniel spent nearly every waking hour on calls with attorneys, former colleagues, or panicked investors trying to salvage whatever remained of his professional reputation. Watching him unravel emotionally was honestly surreal because I had never seen him exist without certainty before. Men like Daniel build their personalities around perceived competence, so when competence collapses publicly, they often lose emotional identity along with it. Then came the first real financial shock. Our joint credit lines were suddenly reduced dramatically. Not frozen. Reduced. That distinction mattered because it meant banks no longer trusted projected stability around Daniel's professional future. 2 days later, one of the luxury investment properties tied to his partnerships entered emergency liquidation. Then another. Suddenly, the entire lifestyle, Daniel spent years presenting as proof of superiority, started collapsing piece by piece under pressure. That was when he finally started looking at me differently. Not romantically. Practically. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel stopped seeing me as the emotionally grounded wife attached to his success story and started seeing me as the only financially stable person left inside the house. One night during dinner, he actually asked how much existed in my personal savings account. The question irritated me immediately because despite everything happening, he still approached money through entitlement instead of humility. I asked why he needed to know, and he admitted several legal advisors recommended preserving as much liquidity as possible while the investigations unfolded. Then he said something unbelievable. He suggested maybe transferring part of my savings temporarily into one of his protected legal holding accounts to shield assets strategically during the investigation. I stared at him across the kitchen table, genuinely stunned. Even after publicly humiliating me for years over my salary, even after watching his own financial empire collapse from reckless arrogance, some part of him still believed my role was sacrificing stability to support his recovery. I told him no immediately. That was the first time in our marriage I refused him financially without softening the answer emotionally afterward. He looked shocked, then offended, then angry. Suddenly, the respectful husband mask disappeared completely, and the real Daniel emerged under pressure. He accused me of abandoning him during temporary hardship after benefiting from his success for years. He reminded me repeatedly that his income funded our lifestyle, our vacations, and our home while my salary barely covered monthly utilities comparatively. That argument revealed the ugliest truth in the marriage, finally. Daniel never viewed financial support as partnership. He viewed it as ownership. Every expensive thing he provided became evidence of superiority in his mind, which meant any resistance from me during his collapse now felt like betrayal instead of boundaries. Then he crossed a line he could not uncross. He told me if I truly loved him, I would stop acting like a teacher protecting lunch money and start behaving like a real wife. That sentence killed something permanently between us. Not because it was insulting, because it exposed how little respect actually existed underneath the marriage once money stopped protecting appearances. I slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, before work, I called the financial advisor from my teachers' union again and scheduled an emergency appointment. During that meeting, I finally learned how much danger I was actually in legally if Daniel's situation worsened. Several shared assets remained vulnerable because of how aggressively he structured debt through marital property over the years. The advisor recommended immediate legal consultation, especially because Daniel's desperation level appeared to be escalating. That afternoon, I contacted a divorce attorney quietly, not because I fully decided to leave yet, because for the first time, I understood staying emotionally passive could destroy me financially too. Meanwhile, Daniel's world kept collapsing publicly. Additional lawsuits surfaced. One partner started cooperating with investigators. Internal company, emails leaked online revealing executives privately discussing liquidity concerns months before reassuring investors publicly that everything remained stable. Then came the final blow. Daniel's company officially filed for bankruptcy protection. The media coverage became relentless afterward. Reporters camped outside former executives' homes. Financial podcasts dissected the collapse constantly. Online commentators mocked the entire corporate culture surrounding performative wealth and reckless leverage. Suddenly, the exact social circles Daniel spent years trying to impress began distancing themselves from him publicly. Friends stopped calling. Country club invitations disappeared. Networking dinners vanished. The wealthy corporate ecosystem that once treated him like a rising star moved on almost instantly because status-based relationships rarely survive humiliation. One evening, about 2 weeks after the bankruptcy filing, I came home from work and found Daniel sitting alone in the dark kitchen, staring at unopened bills spread across the table. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely old. Not physically, spiritually. Like collapse itself aged him faster than time. Then he asked me something quietly. He asked whether I ever hated him for the comments about my salary. For several seconds, I did not answer, because the question itself felt too late. Eventually, I told him the truth. No, I hated what the comments revealed. He looked confused, so I explained further. The problem was never really the jokes. It was the fact that he genuinely believed financial success made him more valuable as a person. Once someone starts measuring human worth through income, eventually they stop respecting anyone whose contribution looks less profitable publicly. Then I told him something else. My salary was never small. Your perspective was. That sentence broke him more visibly than the bankruptcy news ever did. He started crying after that. Not dramatic crying. Exhausted crying. The kind people do when their identity collapses faster than their ego can rebuild explanations around it. Over the next month, I quietly separated our finances legally while preparing divorce paperwork. Daniel stopped fighting emotionally after a while, because I think part of him finally understood what actually ended the marriage. It was not the financial collapse itself. It was discovering that the woman he spent years minimizing built a safer life with one teacher's salary than he built with millions. The final conversation happened 3 months later after we sold the house. Daniel admitted something during the closing paperwork meeting that explained his entire personality better than any apology ever could. He said growing up poor made him terrified of becoming ordinary again. So once money arrived, he started treating financial success like armor protecting him from humiliation permanently. Eventually, he became addicted to feeling superior because superiority felt safer than vulnerability. Listening to him explain it no longer made me angry, just sad. Because deep down, Daniel spent his entire adult life chasing proof he mattered, while overlooking the person quietly proving it every single day beside him. Last week, one of my students handed me a handwritten thank you letter after I stayed late helping her prepare for scholarship interviews. I sat alone in my classroom, afterward reading it, while thinking about everything that happened over the last year. Then I realized something almost funny. Daniel spent years believing my work lacked value because it did not generate impressive numbers. Meanwhile, his entire career disappeared in less than a month once people stopped believing in the illusion surrounding it. But the work I do still matters tomorrow morning when another child walks into my classroom, needing someone patient enough to believe in them before success becomes visible publicly. And honestly, that sounds far richer to me now. Sometimes people mock stable, quiet lives because they confuse loud success with lasting value. But when everything collapses, you find out very quickly which kind of wealth actually survives. If you were in Olivia's place, would you have stayed after the humiliation and financial collapse, or would you have walked away too? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about arrogance, money, and the moment underestimated women stop accepting disrespect disguised as humor, like and subscribe, because the next story might hit even harder.